to the Coders Campus podcast, where you'll learn how to code from one of the best teachers in the industry. Whether you're an absolute beginner or a seasoned pro, the Coders Campus podcast will teach you what you need to know to master the art of programming. And now, your host, Trevor Page.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow coders, welcome to episode 18 now of the Coders Campus podcast. Now, last episode, I had said there was a big delay between episodes, and I was saying, I really need to get, at least, 5 more ratings and reviews to keep the show going. I got 4 last time, so that's good. That's great. I'm not going to complain about getting 4 reviews. That was awesome. So thank you to those 4 people who left reviews. So for anyone else who hasn't yet reviewed the show, please do so. That is what keeps me coming back over and over and creating new content on a timely, or I should say in a timely fashion. So let's dive into this next episode, which is going to be revolving around creating a database in AWS using something called Amazon RDS. So if you followed my instructions up to this point with respect to all the past episodes, then essentially you've been able to launch your own application into this thing that we call the cloud, into Amazon using Elastic Beanstalk. So that's awesome, but you'll still need to hook up most likely a database to it, especially if you were using inside of your application a reference to localhost 8080 in your database connection string. If you're doing that, then this newly launched application that you've put into the cloud in Elastic Beanstalk, it's just not going to work properly because Elastic Beanstalk is not going to be able to do localhost 8080 to make reference to a database. So it's not going to connect the dots in that fashion. So in order to solve this problem, we need to get up and running with how to launch a database in the cloud. And we use, like I said, Amazon RDS, which is, I believe it stands for, I'm assuming, Relational Database something system. I don't know. I'm assuming RDS is something to do with relational databases. So having said that, first things first is you obviously need to go back into AWS, log back in, aws.amazon.com, log into your account, and you're going to navigate to the RDS product. So in order to navigate to the RDS product, you click on the services in the top left-hand corner of your screen. You click on RDS as a part of the database, section or whatever you like. They group them into different sections with these icons on your screen. You click on RDS. So for those of you who aren't able to follow along with this podcast, by watching in front of you your screen, then obviously this is going to be a little bit difficult to explain. But as always, I will try my very best to take something that is visual and turn it into something that is just audio. So the point is, you go to RDS product. And if it's your first time seeing the RDS product, Amazon has these big, splash pages that essentially you can only really do one thing on them, which is good because you only really want to do one thing. So if you're seeing this page because you've never set up an instance, a database instance before, then what you're going to see is a big Get Started Now button. So essentially all you can do is just click on the Get Started Now button. So you click on that because really that's all you can do. And that will start the process of creating your instance, your database instance. So one word that I keep using when I'm going through these tutorials with Amazon is everything is an instance. You have an Elastic Beanstalk instance, you have a database instance, you have your Elastic Cloud instance. All these things are essentially, I would assume computers, somewhere down the line, somewhere in some dark warehouse that's, super air conditioned and everything with like one guy walking around taking care of everything. It's probably a computer somewhere sitting on some rack and, or maybe a virtual computer within a computer. So whenever we say instance, it's essentially like a computer running just for you, running this product. So that's, having said that, what you do is you click on the RDS, you get started now, and then what you do is you choose the type of, they call it the engine, that you want to run it under. Now, they have a few options. I choose MySQL as the option, just because I'm familiar with MySQL, but they also offer PostgreSQL, they offer an Oracle, a SQL Server, something called MariaDB, I think. I've actually never seen Maria. It's got a picture of like a seal on it. I've never used it before. And their Amazon Aurora instance as well. Amazon Aurora, they claim is similar to MySQL. They say it's like a little bit better than MySQL, but I don't think it's free tier eligible. which means that if you choose it, you're going to be paying per hour for that particular database. At least I think that's the way it was. So I usually just choose MySQL because that's what I'm familiar with, and it gets the job done for me, and it is also free tier eligible. So I select that guy, and I start it up, or at least I click on select to get it going. And then you need to sort of choose the type of database this is going to be. So in other words, type being where is it going to be running? Is it going to be running in production, or is it going to be running in a dev like test environment? So when you see this screen, you can choose between the two. What you notice is the dev/test environment one says it's free tier eligible, whereas the other one, the production environment one, is not free tier eligible. So chances are, if you're just, following through doing this AWS stuff with me just to play around with it and test it out, you most likely want to choose dev test because you most likely don't want to pay for it yet. So that's what I would recommend choosing, the dev test one. So you go ahead, click on that, click on next step. And then you need to sort of, specify some of the nitty-gritty details for this stuff. So what I do here is, you need to specify the details. So basically on the first page where you specify the details for the database, I more or less leave a lot of stuff as the defaults. There's even a checkbox on this page that says only to allow showing options that are free tier eligible. So if you're afraid that you're accidentally going to choose an option that means it's going to make you pay for it, I'd recommend checking that box to say, yes, only show me the free tier stuff so I don't accidentally do something that I will regret later. So you go ahead and click that guy. And essentially here in this page, I need to choose the DB instance class is what they call it. But really it's just, how powerful would you like this database instance to be? This is where we usually choose the micro instance, because the micro instance is free tier eligible. And I don't want you to think that these micro instances are not good. I actually use a micro instance in my production environment for my Professo application, so it does just fine. I mean, I have 100 teachers in there with thousands of students, and the micro instance works just fine. It's fast. It's faster than anything else. It's faster than my blog that I use, that I pay, GoDaddy for however many hundreds of dollars a year I pay for it. It's faster than GoDaddy. So, they're fast. So don't feel like just because you're choosing micro, you're getting a bad deal here. It does its job perfectly for what I need it to do. So I choose the DB T2 micro because I think you have a choice between T1 micro and T2 micro. The T1 micro has less RAM. The T2 micro has more RAM, but they're both still free, so obviously I'm going to choose the one that's more powerful. Then there's an option called multi-AZ deployment. I'm not sure what AZ stands for. I'm assuming maybe it's multi-area deployment or something fancy like that. And in any words, if you choose yes for multi-AZ deployment, it's not part of the free billing. So I say no, because I want it to be free. So I choose no. And then your storage type for the actual database storage type that it's going to use, I usually just choose the general purpose SSD, which stands for the solid state device. So general purpose SSD is qualifies for free tier, and I just choose that I have the default 5 gigabytes of database storage that I choose. 5 gigs is essentially the minimum that you can choose, and if you do choose it, you'll see there's a warning message that says, hey, whoa, provisioning less than 100 gigabytes of SSD storage for high throughput workloads could result in higher latencies upon exhaustion. So they try to give you this warning message that makes you feel like, oh, maybe I should choose 100 gigabytes. But that's sort of Amazon being sneaky, because I think if you choose 100 gigabytes, you have to pay for it. So, don't be worried about the warning message. I have 5 gigabytes. It's more than enough storage that I need for testing things out. Just stick with 5 gigs. You can always upgrade the storage later. You can always go up. You can change it from 5 to 6 to 7 to 10 to 15 to whatever you want. That's fine. What you can't do is go backwards. You can't start with 100 gigabytes and then choose to go back to 5. You have to delete your entire instance, the entire database, and start from scratch again with starting up your new database to, provision it as having 5 gigabytes of database storage. So sneaky for Amazon here for doing that to us. So heed my advice, choose the 5 gigabyte option. Okay, so the next up in the settings, all you need to do is set up your, three things: your DB Instance Identifier, your master username, and your master password. So the DB Instance Identifier is the unique identifier that you use to identify this particular instance. And when I say instance, think computer sitting somewhere in a cold, dark corner of a warehouse somewhere in, who knows where they store their database, or their, whatchamacallits. Anyway, you get the idea. The warehouse full of computers. There's a word for it. I can't think of it right now. So that's just the identifier that you use for it. You can call it whatever you like. In my example, if you go to the show notes page for this, you'll see that I just use something called Coders Campus DB. Because why not? Fair enough. And then the username is just whatever username you want to use. And password, pretty obvious stuff. You choose whatever password you want to choose. But please remember the password that you choose because, you don't want to lose it. Because I don't know if you don't know it, you can't change it, right? Pretty obvious stuff for you guys, I'm sure, at this point. So you go ahead, you click Next after all that. So what we have just done is we've set up how powerful it is with the micro instance. We've set up the storage type to say 5 gigabytes. We've given it an identifier, a unique identifier. Mine was Coders Campus DB, and a username and a password. Boom, you click Next. Next up is you need to create some settings with respect to security and all this stuff that goes into the more complex stuff inside of Amazon and how they make things work with security groups and all this stuff. So I believe on this page I more or less left everything as its defaults, except it asks you to specify a name for the database. So again, you can name your database whatever you want. Again, the name of the database is not the same as the name of the instance. Okay, the instance represents if you want to have potentially many databases on this instance. I'm sure that's possible. Then each database name should be unique on that instance. So you name your database name whatever the heck you want to name it. I just named mine my database name because I was very creative with my database naming. And yeah, I think I left everything else the same. I had it create a new security group for this database. Security groups are sort of, rules that you can apply to certain things. We'll get into that in just a moment. I think I left everything else the same. And then there's always the backup area where you can say, what's the backup period for, the default is you can back up your database every 7 days. You can choose a window to back it up within. You can enable something called enhanced monitoring, which I don't usually do. And you can specify what's the sort of, upgrade window to do minor upgrades to your database instance and all this stuff. So this is all your preference. You can leave it default and say I have no preference for anything, or you can get crazy and you can start to be specific about how you want it to back up your database and how you want it to maintain your database. All up to you. So having said that, finally, after almost 15 minutes of talking, you can click on Launch DB Instance, and sure enough, your database instance will start to launch. So we are very close to being done here with creating our database. But don't get too excited just yet. You'll need to go ahead and view your instance, view the database instance that you are in the process of creating. And there's a button to do that. Or you can go and click on in the services, again, in the very top left-hand corner of your entire AWS screen there. You can click on services and you can click on RDS. And then you'll see that there's now a different screen. You no longer have that splash screen where you can only choose one option, the get started now option to create your first database. Now it's a different screen because it knows that you have a database that's currently being launched. And you'll see like a little link that says, look at my DB instances. And it says you have, 1 out of 40 DB instances, currently running for your profile or something like that. So you can go ahead and click on that link to go and view your DB instance. And then you'll see that it is currently in a process of creating the database. So you'll see it's probably, I think it's orange or something, a little text under the status for your database that's creating. And it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to fully create. It switches from creating to, I think, backing up, and then eventually goes to available in green text. So once it says available, then you're ready to rock. You can start configuring things. You might even be able to start configuring things when it's in the backing up phase, because it's already created and now it's just backing up. But, it's up to you if you want to wait a little bit longer for it to go and switch from backing up to be available. So once it's available, then you can start to configure things a little bit more. So the thing that I ran into previously when I was working with these RDS instances, these Amazon RDS products, if you will, was when I set up the database, it didn't have any rules set up, specifically inbound rules for traffic coming in to the database. It didn't set it up in such a way that I could even access my own database. Okay, so you need to make sure that you can connect to your database from the outside of your VPC, your virtual private cloud network, if you will. So, like I said, when I try to connect to it, like from the outside using something like Toad or the MySQL Workbench or whatever, it wouldn't work. I couldn't connect to it, even though I had all the proper connection details, username, password, ports, everything were correct. It wouldn't let me connect, and I was losing my mind. But I've seen that recently. I just did this today to refresh my memory and go back and recreate a database instance. I noticed that it actually does put in one rule for your inbound traffic, and it puts in your own IP address. So I thought that was pretty nice because now it puts it in right away, so you will be able to connect to your database right away. But this is a little bit bad in my opinion because a lot of people don't have static IP addresses. At least I don't think I have a static IP address, which means if I unplug my router or my modem and then plug it back in, it's probably going to reconnect me to the internet with a different IP address. My internet service provider is going to give me a different IP address, which means that in my settings, my configuration settings for my database, I'm no longer going to be able to access my database using the processes that I used to use that used to work perfectly, right? I used to be able to go to Toad or MySQL Workbench and connect to my database and run my select star from queries and everything. It's not going to work anymore, and I'm going to be scratching my head saying, well, what the heck is different? What changed? It was your IP address that changed. So, having said that, it's important to know how to do what it is that I'm about to explain to you. So the first step is to identify the security group that is associated with your Amazon RDS instance. Okay, so to do that, it's fairly simple. You go into your database that we've just set up. Remember where I said it was it says creating and then backing up and then available. When you go into that screen, there's a little arrow drop down to see more details about your database instance. And when you do that, there's a little itty bitty tab. There's 3 little pictures on the left hand side that are different tabs that can show you different views. So the first tab, is like a monitoring view. And that is, for monitoring your database. It shows you like the CPU cycles that are being used right now and in the past, day or so, what the activity's been like and the number of, connections that are open and that kind of thing and how much space is left. That's the monitoring tab. That's, great. That's helpful, but that's not what we want right now. We want to get access to the security group because we want to edit the rules of the security group. So the next tab down from the monitoring tab is the details tab. So the details tab, you click on that guy and boom, you'll see a whole bunch of text on your screen. It'll look pretty overwhelming, but there is a section that says security groups. And again, if you go to the show notes for this episode, I'm assuming it'll be coderscampus.com/ what is this, episode 18, I think I said. Let me just double check that. I don't want to be lying to you guys. Let me see. Yeah, 18. So coderscampus.com/18. And that'll give you, there'll be a link that points back to the big article where I have like all this information stored. You'll be able to scroll down to there and see the screenshot that I'm talking about. So the screenshot will show you there's an area called security groups. I've circled it, and it will give you your specific security group for this database. Okay, so every instance will have its own security group, I believe. So the database instance will have a security group. Your Elastic Beanstalk instance, remember that we were learning about in previous episodes, those will have their own security groups. Your entire Elastic Cloud, so the entire virtual private cloud or whatever it is that you're working with that holds all this stuff inside of it, will have its own security group and rules that you can apply to each of those. So we're looking specifically at the security group just for our database. So we make note of the ID for that security group. So the one that I'm looking at right now, it calls it the RDS Launch Wizard is the sort of name that it gives to it because I went through the wizard to launch it. And then there's a specific name, a specific ID assigned to it. Mine just happens to be SG-CEF63 blah 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 blah. So there's a whole bunch of alphanumeric type ID that gets assigned to it. Just make note of it. Okay, you can copy it to a notepad or take a screenshot of it or just open a new tab and put it aside, whatever you want, because you need to remember the name or that specific ID for that security group. Now, armed with that information of knowing your security group, then you need to navigate to something called the EC2 page. Okay, so the EC2 page is the first product that appears in the services link. So if you go to the top left of the screen, you click on your services drop down, which shows you all the products that are inside of AWS. That's, because you have the view where you can look at all the products. And inside of there, the first one is called EC2. Click on that guy, and it brings up your EC2 page. In your EC2 page, your dashboard for your EC2 instance, you need to navigate to the security groups area. It's on the left-hand side. You scroll down. There's a whole bunch of options kind of in your frame on the left. You scroll down. You click on security groups. Boom. Then you can see all the security groups that have been created. For the screenshot that I have, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only 5 security groups. You probably won't have that many. You'll probably have 3 maybe. I have 5 because I've been messing around a fair bit with this particular account. So you go there, click on security groups, and inside of the security groups of the 5 or 3 or however many you see, you'll be able to identify them by the ID. Again, remember I said make note of the ID. Find the one that matches the ID that you just made note of. That is the ID for your database's security group. Okay. Then you click on that guy. That's the security group that we want to start modifying. When you click on it, you'll be able to see an area where you can modify the description of it, the inbound rules, the outbound rules, and even some tags if you want to add tags to it. I personally haven't had to put tags on anything yet, but hey, to each his own. If you want to go ahead and add tags, knock yourself out. So specifically, I want to look at the inbound rules, okay? Because what the problem is right now is if the inbound rules aren't set up properly, I won't be able to communicate and query my own database. So click on inbound, and there should be at least one rule in there. And it can be a bit confusing if this is the first time you're looking at it in terms of how these rules work. But they're split up into 4 sort of, areas where you can mess around with. So there's the type of the rule, which tells you, is this a MySQL rule? Is this a rule for, a different part of, doesn't necessarily have to correspond with MySQL, right? It's essentially the type represents a port, right? This could be your, regular HTTP traffic. This could be your HTTPS traffic. So you can set up rules for all the different ports. So when you choose MySQL as a type, it's actually MySQL/Aurora because they want you to use their Aurora product. If you choose MySQL Aurora, it will automatically change the port range to just be 3306 because 3306 is the port for MySQL, and it'll automatically set the protocol to be TCP. Okay, and then the source is where it's the source of the inbound traffic. So here you can actually edit the rule, and you can click a drop down on the source, and you can choose either custom, anywhere, or my IP. So if you choose my IP, it will take your IP address and put it into the source with the proper formatting and everything, which is kind of nice. So then you could say, for MySQL, I want to say my IP is sort of allowed as an inbound traffic rule. Okay, and you can save that. So what that'll do is it'll allow you to connect to your own database from your own computer. Now the downside to that is, like I said, if your IP changes, then this rule won't apply anymore, and you're going to have to go back in there and change the rule. But the way around that is to, instead of choosing my IP address as the source of this traffic for your inbound rule, you can instead choose anywhere as the source for your inbound rule for your database security group. Okay, remember, I'm just trying to repeat everything I've just said over and over again, so hopefully you get the terminologies. So again, we are editing a security group. We're editing the inbound rules for our RDS security group, which we made note of. Remember, we made note of the actual security group ID. So we're editing the inbound rules for our RDS security group. And the inbound rule that we're adding, because you can add multiple rules if you like, multiple inbound rules. You can add a source of being anywhere. So you can say if the traffic comes from anywhere and goes into port 3306 for MySQL, then allow it. Okay? So then that solves the problem of, hey, if your IP address changes, you won't be able to get access to your own database anymore. That'll solve that problem. However, that sort of opens up a brand new problem, which is, hey, you can now, anyone on the internet can now try to connect to your database. Now, having said that, they obviously still need the username and the password, so it's still, fairly secure. But, this is just another layer of security. I'm not an expert in security. I'm not masquerading as an expert in security whatsoever. That is absolutely not my strong suit. So take what I say here, with a grain of salt. But I'm assuming that if you choose anywhere as a rule, you're opening yourself up to possible attacks from the outside. Whereas if you have a custom rule where you set up just your own IP address, that's got to be a little bit more secure, because now you have Amazon on your side running some of the linebacker blocking, if you will, on the incoming bad traffic that could potentially try to harm your database. So there's a trade-off there, right? I'm not sure if there's a good solution in between, unless you have your own static IP address, in which case your IP address never changes, in which case, there you go. You can set it up as your own IP address and you are good to go. But if you have a dynamic IP address, then, you might, maybe you can resolve some sort of a domain name instead of an IP address. I'm not sure if you can put a domain name in there or not as a source. Actually, I can probably check that right now. So actually, let me hop over I'm going to go to my EC2 page. Because remember, the EC2 page has the security groups, and inside of security groups, I can choose my RDS security group, and I can choose inbound, getting the inbound rules. I can edit the inbound rule. I'm going to add another rule. Let's see, it says CIDR, IP, or security group is what you can put into the source. I'm not sure what a CIDR is. I've never tried to look into that, but it doesn't look like there's a rule or a way that you can add in a domain name, which is, I guess, probably by design, but I guess it's a little bit unfortunate, because that would solve problems for people with dynamic IP addresses. They could just assign it to a domain name and have a DNS server resolve that for them, but who knows? There must be a reason why they don't allow that. So, okay, cool. That answers that question. So, having said that, there you go. You've essentially opened up the appropriate, ports or rules or whatever, so that you can have inbound traffic coming in, and then you'll be able to connect to your DB instance. So you can then, in order to connect to it, you'll need to know what the information is to connect to your database. So now we can hop back over to our the area where we can look at our database. So that is, let me see, if you go back to services in the top left, you click on RDS in the databases area, then you'll be able to see inside of the, inside of your screen, you can choose the DB instances, which is a little link that, it says 1 out of 40 for me, because I only have one DB instance running. I click on that guy, and then I can see my database instance. Again, we follow the same process I'd said before. You expand your the instance that you want to be looking into, and instead of being on the monitoring tab, you move over to the details tab. Remember, we talked about monitoring tab and details tab? Same thing here. When you go to the details tab, boom, you've got all this information on the screen that you can use that's needed to connect to your database. So you've got your endpoint information. Okay, so if you picture going into MySQL Workbench, or picture going into Toad for MySQL, or even setting up the link inside of your own application to point to a database with a connection string, you need the endpoint information. So the endpoint is right there in the details area. You can copy paste your endpoint. Typically the endpoint we use is localhost 8080, but obviously we're not using localhost 8080 here. We're using an actual endpoint that points to our database in the cloud. So it has its own sort of big long address, URL, whatever you want to call it, for connecting to the endpoint. Then you need the database name. Again, that's in your details area. Your DB name is there. Mine was my database name. Your username is there. My username I put as my username. You'll need to put in your password. Hopefully, again, you remembered what your password was. And then the port is 3306 if you're using MySQL. Otherwise, there's a port that's assigned in the details area as well. You just look at port. There you go. You got what you need. So with this information, you can connect to your database from, like I said, Toad for MySQL or MySQL Workbench. Or you can use this to create your connection string inside of your properties file of your application. So whatever your properties file is currently configured as, because probably pointing to localhost 8080, you just replace localhost 8080 with your endpoint. You leave your port as 3306, and if you need to update your username and your password in your properties file, and then that's it. You can save your settings in your application, and you can rerun or restart your program, whether that's in the cloud or whether that's on your local machine. When you do that, it should properly connect to the database in the cloud. Okay, but again, the caveat there is, hey, if your IP address is different than the one that's set up in the inbound rules, it won't work. If you try to access it from a different computer, it won't work because that's probably going to have a different IP address. Or if you have a friend coding with you, or if you have a team coding with you, none of them will be able to access it unless you set it up as an inbound rule in your security group of your RDS instance. So that's where, it just gets to the point where it's like, okay, I'm just going to put in, anything. Anyone can come in and access this database, so long as they obviously have the right name and password and everything, username and password for connecting to the database. So it might get to the point where you just have to say, allow all the traffic. So having said that, again, I'm not a security expert, so take what I say there with a grain of salt. But there you go. Now you've got a database set up. It's running in the cloud. You can interact with it just like you would interact with a database that you created on your local machine now. There's not much different that happens. There's nothing really I can think of that's different that happens other than instead of doing localhost, you now have a more longer and annoying looking endpoint URL that you need to point to. But other than that, I mean, it might be slightly slower in terms of getting data to and from it. So if you're using a localhost machine, so if you're using your personal laptop or your personal desktop and you're trying to do dev work, so you're running it in a local environment, you might find that the app is maybe a little bit slower because now it has to send, the queries has to go from your computer across the internet to the database in the cloud, and then the cloud needs to return the data across the internet back to your computer. So that is a little bit of a downside there, but trust me, once you're running with an Amazon, like the Elastic Beanstalk instance. So your Elastic Beanstalk is where your application is running. And when your application is now pointing to a database that's also in the same region, then it's lightning fast. Okay, so that should go without saying. I should mention, when you create your database instance, make sure you're in the same region as you are when you created your Elastic Beanstalk instance. When I say region, it's in the top right-hand corner of your AWS window. It's next to you have your username or your actual name, and then it's the region, and then it's your little support drop down. So the region is, North Virginia, Ohio, North California, Oregon, Central Canada, Ireland and the EU, Frankfurt, London, Asia Pacific, blah, 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 blah. So all these are different regions where you can be hosting your applications or all your instances. Remember, your instances, your computer sitting in a warehouse somewhere. This is where they are. North Virginia, Ohio, Northern California, Oregon, et cetera, et cetera. These are all the areas where I guess these warehouses are. So you need to make sure that when you create your database instance, it matches the same region as your Elastic Beanstalk instance. So wherever you created your Elastic Beanstalk, make sure you create the database in the same region. Otherwise, there will be lag. There's going to be latency when your application server in North Virginia tries to talk to the database in, let's say, Ireland or something. It has to, that traffic has to go across the internet quite a long distance and back, and it does create a noticeably slower environment when you do it like that. So make sure that you create them in the same region. Otherwise, everything I said is wrong, and you won't be able to have a nice lightning fast connection in production. Okay? And I shouldn't say connection, I should say, perceived speed in your application. So there you go, that's it. I know I say that's it. It took me half an hour to say all that stuff, but there you go. That is how you set up an actual database in the cloud. Hopefully that is extremely useful to you. I know it's been extremely useful to me to be able to use this stuff. So that's pretty darn exciting, right? And you can use it all for free for your first year, and then thereafter, it usually, like I said, costs around. The databases are around the same cost as the other Elastic Beanstalk instances. So I typically pay around, I think it's around $15 to $20 a month per instance. So Elastic Beanstalk will cost me about $15 a month, and the database will cost me about $15 a month. So you're looking at, if you're running both of those together, you're looking at about $30 a month to run this stuff. Okay, it's not an insane expense, especially when you consider all the power that comes behind this stuff. All this stuff can, auto scale up. If there's more and more traffic coming in, it'll automatically, create more and more instances, and that's really cool stuff. And plus, they have load balancers and all this stuff that I don't want to have to learn about, right? I don't want to have to learn how to set up a load balancer inside of AWS. You can create a load balancer in minutes. Okay, if you had to do that on your own in the real world, good luck doing that in minutes. Okay, that's why we're paying Amazon the bucks, because they do the stuff for us. We can set it, we can forget it. Cool? All right, so now, we've learned how to create a database in AWS. We've learned how to configure that database in AWS. We've learned a little bit about how to connect your code to the RDS instance, like I said, by using the proper connection string in your application properties file. Next up, we need to talk about how to point a specific domain name to this fancy new hosted application that's in the cloud. Because right now, if you remember way back, we were talking about Elastic Beanstalk. It has its own URL that you can click on to go and visit your application as a visitor, as a user. So, but that URL is very long and very not friendly for giving away to your family and friends. It's not like, coderscampus.com. It's a very long, annoying, sequence of characters and letters and numbers. It's not something that you can easily remember. So that's not good if you want to be, launching a real world app and giving away a URL that's, human readable and whatnot to people. You need to know how to point a domain name that you purchase yourself to this application. So that when you visit coderscampus.com, it actually goes to this application that's hosted on AWS inside of Elastic Beanstalk and RDS. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. So thank you very much for tagging along with me. As always, I will press the issue of ratings and reviews. That literally is what I'm using as the meter or the check to see if I should, how quickly I should produce the next episode. Because if you guys aren't interested, then, I can't afford to put my time into creating more of this stuff if you guys just aren't interested. So please, the way you can show me that you are interested in these tutorials that are free, completely free, just go and leave a rating review in iTunes. I think you can do so via coderscampus.com. I believe it's /iTunes. Let me just double check, coderscampus.com/iTunes. I think I do this every time. So that'll open up iTunes, so make sure you have iTunes installed on your computer. I wish Apple made this process easier. I know it's annoying. I know it is cumbersome. But iTunes right now, that's where the main podcasting directory is. That is the podcasting directory to be on. And that is, if you have more reviews there, everyone goes there to look for podcasts. That's the main one. So the more ratings and reviews I can get there, the more popular the show becomes. The more popular it becomes, the more people will be interested in listening to the stuff that I do and listening and possibly being interested in the stuff that I teach that is not free. So I have, paid products like the Coders Campus. You can go and you can join Coders Campus and you can get access to every single, full course I've ever built. I have an entire course on Amazon or AWS, Amazon Web Services, right? It's a full course. It's a video course. You can watch me go through each of these steps in front of your face, and you'll be able to get all the knowledge you need very, very quickly through these courses. Plus, I also have courses on Java. I have an intro to Java. I have an enterprise Java. I have JavaScript. I have AngularJS. I have all these tutorials that taught by me, yours truly, that you guys say you like a lot. That's what helps me pay the bills, right? That's how I'm able to do this as my full-time job, because right now this is what I do as my full-time job. I am a teacher. I used to be a programmer full-time. Now I'm a teacher full-time. So in order to pay the bills and keep the lights on and everything running, the first line of this process is leaving ratings and reviews. That is why this is so important. So please do show your interest by leaving a rating review, coderscampus.com/iTunes, and I will look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode. So take care of yourselves. Happy learning. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Coders Campus podcast. But before you go, Trevor has a favor to ask you. In order to keep these episodes free, he'd love for you to leave a rating and review the podcast on iTunes. Just go to coderscampus.com/review to leave your own rating and review of the show. So if you have 30 seconds to spare right now, please help out by leaving a rating and review via coderscampus.com/review. It will ensure that you continue to get these awesome free podcast episodes each and every week. So if you like free swag, head on over to coderscampus.com/review. Happy learning!